Next book we are going to talk about is called Brit-ish. And Brit-ish was written by Afua Hirsch, who is a pretty well known, I believe, kind of television personality. And she was a lawyer at one time, and she worked for the BBC, I believe. She was a journalist, and in the UK. And I say British, that I say the title that way because
Describe how it's spelled for those on the
yes,
podcast.
because the way that she has the title spelled is it literally is Brit all by itself, and then ish is in parentheses. And as you can probably guess, that's to sort of portray this feeling of not being fully British, but being like only a little bit British or half British. And that is really the main theme of the book is Afua talks a lot about not feeling fully British herself, and she kind of explores what it means to be British. So this book is interesting. Like I mentioned, Afua is a journalist first and foremost, and so it is a nonfiction book, and it's semi autobiographical, but she also kind of does research and kind of does almost like field pieces where she kind of does her own like like actual research on the job on the field, of different themes that she explores in the book. And it's really interesting because you're not just getting her take on everything, you're also getting kind of just a more broader view of other stories and other things that have happened surrounding race and identity in the UK. So if you're an Anglophile like me, I think this is a great book to read, because you'll learn a lot about how these themes are in the UK. I mean, I think especially with this podcast right now, we've mostly talked to American people and seen the American view of what it's like to grow up with immigrant parents here in the US. But they have some of the same issues and takes on things in the UK as well. So it's just an interesting take on that. Uh, and so the book is kind of divided into a variety of like topics or categories. I'll just go through some of them. Her first chapter is called "Where Are You From?", which is a question that we talk about a
Hmm.
lot in this podcast. And so she kind of delves into that question, how she feels about it and what does it really mean, which I found really interesting. She has another chapter called Origins, one called Bodies, Heritage, Class. So these are all different themes that she explores in the book. Um, and I think some of the main cultural themes that I really took away were, Afua is mixed race. So her mother is Ghanaian and her father is like British, like white British, but like he has like some German descent. Um, and so it's kind of interesting to hear her talk about being mixed race and being really kind of confused about what she really was, because she grew up similar to a past book that we talked about, Crying in H Mart. She grew up with in a non-diverse environment in Wimbledon in London.
Ooh,
Yeah, yeah,
love the
Wimbledon.
tournament. Love the tennis
Wimbledon,
tournament.
yeah, I think
That's cool. I didn't
we
know people
know
actually
Wimbledon.
live there.
Yeah, we know Wimbledon for the tennis tournament, but
Hmm.
it also is an actual community where people live. And at least at the time that Afua was living there, it was not very diverse, and so she often felt very othered there. She actually did experience pretty overt racism growing up, which was
It's
really sad
unfortunate.
to
Yeah.
hear. And so she goes into that quite a bit in the book. And she really lost her sense of place, and she just wasn't sure really where she belonged, and that led to her feeling like she wasn't fully British, and that she must be more African, and she probably will feel more at home there, and that leads her to actually move there shortly after college. And she goes into that. a lot. I'll talk about that a little bit later because that goes into like my favorite moment. But yeah, so that's a major theme is being mixed race, dealing with racism, um, uh, moving to her heritage country, which is something that we haven't really talked about yet. But that I thought that was a really interesting part in the book. She actually moves on two different occasions to Africa, to two different countries within Africa, to sort of just find where she belongs. And obviously, that can be complicated, as we have talked about. Sometimes, just because some place is your heritage country, it's not necessarily where you belong or where you feel most
Mhm.
comfortable. So Afua kind of finds that out. And yeah, so those are some of the main cultural themes that she kind of explores within this book. So as I said, I think my favorite moment is one of the times when she moves to Africa. So she actually moves to Africa once when she is fresh out of college, and she gets a job there in Senegal, which is not where she's from, not where her mother is from or her family is from. But she figures like, oh, I'm in Africa. Like I'll feel more
The
like I
roots.
belong
Yeah.
here. Like people
Mm.
will accept me more. And she actually, she hasn't. I think it's a good experience for her, and I think she is happy that she did it. But it ends up leaving her with more questions than answers, actually, because she finds that actually some of her Senegalese coworkers kind of take advantage of her for being like the foreigner who will like give them money and things. And she just finds that people actually kind of treat her like a foreigner and like an outsider. And that's very disorienting for her at that young age. And she kind of comes back to the UK wondering why that didn't work out and why she actually feels more at home in the UK when she has never really felt at home in the UK. And that's kind of actually where she starts the book. And it's not a completely narrative book, so she kind of jumps around, but it's also that's actually kind of where she starts in the book, is from that place of how she felt when she first came back to the UK after living in Senegal for a while. But my favorite moment is actually the second time she moves to Africa. She actually does move to Ghana, and at this point she's a little bit older. She has a partner and a daughter. And she moves to Ghana thinking that this is going to be a permanent move, and she's going to like, Senegal didn't work out because it wasn't Ghana. It wasn't where her
Mm.
roots were really from. And so now she's moving to Ghana, and she's like gonna be where her roots are. But of course, she moved there, and again she um found that it wasn't quite as much home as she had hoped it would be. And kind of her idealistic expectations of moving there and just being like fully embraced by the community and blending in didn't quite happen. And she talks about even having to like learn the language, and her partner was actually better at learning the language than her. He's also of Ghanaian descent, and she talked about how weird that was. And she a really interesting part, which is not my favorite moment but is just interesting, is that she had a very harrowing experience where her and her partner were actually attacked on a beach in Ghana. And that was kind of one of the last straws for her, of really realizing that she didn't belong there. And that it actually could be dangerous. How much
Mm.
and that, at the end of the day, she was seen as a foreigner, to the point where she wasn't even fully safe there. So it was interesting. It was really interesting to hear about that, to hear someone try and go back to their heritage country, uh and find that it wasn't all that they thought it was going to be. So yeah, so I found that really interesting about the book. My favorite quote I'm actually going to read is kind of from the aftermath of her move to Ghana, where she kind of reflects on that time. So I'm gonna read about that. So she says, "Nevertheless, I can't help but reflect on the lengths I've gone to in the search for an identity that would allow the two sides of my heritage, British and Ghanaian, to peacefully coexist. I am proud of my African heritage. It has shaped me, given me a history, and a sense of continuity that enriches the contours of my world. At the same time, I really am very British, as Ghanaians have often taken great pains to point out. Yeah, so that's it. And yeah, I highly recommend British, especially if you are an Anglophile like myself, or you just want to explore what it's like to have immigrant parents in a different country, and with different dynamics. So yeah, so I highly recommend it.